Welcome to another episode of Talking Shiite. Today we are joined by Oluwaseun Babalola. Oluwaseun Babalola is a Sierra Leonean Nigerian-American director and producer based in New York City. She created the production company called Duke Global Media to pursue her passions for Black and African content, shooting documentaries in Haiti, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Botswana, and Spain. She has launched initiatives to support capacity building in creative industries in Africa, and most recently, Oluwaseun has been a producer on CNN's United States of America with Kamau Bell, and a co-producer on the film Picture a Scientist, a 2020 Tribeca film. Sean, thank you, really, thank you so much for joining us today, and I really appreciate you giving us time. This conversation is primarily focused around just providing a little bit of context and getting one of my friends who experiences this on a daily basis, the African-American experience, giving us an insight into what your experiences are like on a daily basis and how you are viewing this current environment and how we can help. So first and foremost, Sean, how are you?
Well, thank you for asking that question. To be honest, if I'm really thinking about it, I feel energized. I like seeing people speaking out. I like seeing the conversations going on, the protests, people actually just like getting out there and being tired and saying I'm tired and just like, I just hope it sticks. So I'm just like excited to see where it goes.
And that's exactly right. Like, that's a great place to be energized and to be hopeful. And I'm in the same spot as you. And I think you and I were talking yesterday. I'm trying to be as optimistic as possible, but the landscape is changing, and we'll talk about that. So, I'm a minority in this country as well, and being a Muslim for the last 2 decades in America hasn't been a fun ride, but it's nothing, and literally like nothing compared to what my African American friends go through on a daily basis. How can minorities help the cause of the African American community, Black Lives Matters, and just Black people in general in America?
Well, so I think it's good to remember that the Black experience isn't the same for every Black person in America or just the world.
Sure.
So if you are a non-Black person of color and you have Black people in your community, I think it's super important to just ask them specifically, like, what's up? What do you need? How can I, just help the situation? But make sure you're not putting the work on them to, provide you with all the answers.
Right.
And, censoring yourself by saying like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, we know you're sorry. But like, that's also more effort that we have to do to sympathize with you and comfort you and you being sorry. And that censors you instead of the issue that's going on. So I just really think like opening the discourse and just talking about it and asking people individually, like, what do you need from this situation? What does that support look like for you?
Yeah, I think, what I did over the weekend was just check in with some of my friends that are affected by this firsthand, right? Like, for example, you and a few other people across the country that that I know are maybe going through a hard time. I didn't come to you and say I'm sorry for what you're going through. I just said, how are you doing, right? So if that's and this whole conversation on the podcast bore out of that, right? Like this. So I think if people consciously try to have these conversations, these maybe difficult conversations, and they'll learn what their role is in like what is your capacity to help, and your friends, your African American friends, will tell you how you can utilize your expertise or how you can utilize your privilege, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, to help the cause at large.
And also like, don't be afraid to like do the work and look stuff up and look the history of things up and kind of like dig for yourself instead of, because not all Black people have the answers either. some of us are searching and trying to figure out what's going on as well. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned earlier is really relevant because just like you said, every person, it's not like every African American person's experience is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the needs for, if you're based in like Austin, the needs for that community may be completely different than somebody who's based in LA or somebody who's based in New York. So finding out what is happening at a local level and what organizations need, and if you need to volunteer or if you need to if you feel like you can help by making a social media post for them, not on your own post, but like for them, writing an article, doing a blog post, being at a protest in person, they'll let you know. So
Yeah.
find out what the local community's needs are. And then that's a great place to start. So I think the Muslim community and the Black community have very close ties. They're rooted almost in at inception. Um, so what are some steps that you can think of that we can do to help or support our African American friends?
So it's interesting that you brought that up, and I was thinking about it because I'll tell this back to America, but thinking of just like globally, like my mother's from Sierra Leone, that's a Muslim country,
Yep.
or like if I'm in Nigeria during Ramadan, where my father's from, like I'm hearing calls to prayer all the time from the window.
Yeah.
So in some spaces, Black and Muslim just like
Same
go
thing.
together. It's just that's how it is. And then in America, we have Muslim communities, but I feel like it's very segregated in America. And I'm glad that you're bringing this up because, like, well, we have like a Black American was a Malcolm X is probably like the most
Most well known about
the
Black
most
Americans.
well known. Yeah, but I think the discourse has to be there. It all comes down to communication. It always comes back to communication, and I feel like I'm not Muslim, but I have Muslim family and I have Black Muslim friends. And I find that they are always telling me that they feel erased from the conversation, the Muslim conversation. And like, have you ever heard of the hashtag Blackout Eid?
No, I've not.
So, so every Eid I see, like on Twitter or on like Instagram, I always see this hashtag Blackout Eid, and it's Black Muslims showing what they're doing for the celebration, and they show like what they're wearing, and they show like just to be like we're here.
Yep.
And it's usually like a worldwide conversation, but the fact that that platform exists means that they didn't feel included or welcomed already in the conversation. They had to create their own space. And
Yeah.
so, because all of our history is intertwined, whether in America or Africa or whatever, and just Islam in general, it's like let's look at why these communities are segregated the way they are, and
Yep.
how we can bring them back together. Like, what is there that is lacking? What is there that kind of did the initial separation? Like, what is actually going on, so that we can try and like help each other and combine it. That's
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I think that's a valid point because a lot of the mosques that I go to, there's not that healthy population of African American Muslims, which I know are out there, right? Like
yeah.
I interact with them all the time, and I know they exist. But when I go to my mosque, it's mostly South Asians or Desis, as we like to call them, people from India and Pakistan that are there. I know I'm living in Virginia now, and the imam for the Adams Center here, Imam Majid, African American gentleman, and he's amazing. So there's that mosque in itself is very diverse, and there is a healthy amount of people from all different walks of life and all different races and ethnicities there. But that might be an outlier than what is actually out there, which is, I think, counter to what Islam at large is all over the world, right? Like
Right.
some of the biggest schools of for Islamic study, especially for Sunni Muslims, are based in Sudan,
So
uh,
yeah.
and Egypt. So like that's that's count that's contrary to how we're operating in America, and we need to be more conscious of that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that hashtag. Like I never came across it, and I need to be more vigilant about it. And it'll be interesting to experience that in the upcoming Eid, in about a month and a half away from us now.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm sure you can even look at the past ones like that
right.
existed like years before and just scroll through because like yeah, I've been seeing it for a while now.
Yeah. That's awesome, and I'll definitely need to do some homework when it comes to that. Um, so for me, one of the biggest steps that minorities, especially South Asians or Desis, need to recognize that sometimes inadvertently we become a detrimental tool used against the African American community. We need to recognize our privilege. Our privilege lies in Asians being considered this model minority. Also, unfortunately, the use of N-word is very prevalent in the South Asian slash Desi communities amongst the teenagers and guys in their early 20s, because sometimes they consider their rite of passage, right? Because they have a lot of African American friends, or they grew up in a predominantly African American community. You and I had an amazing conversation about this almost 4 or 5 years ago, and you completely changed my perspective on this. Can you please explain how the use of the N word, whether how casual or how much of a hall pass you might have gotten from your African American friends, it might lend itself to further harm the African American community?
Yeah, you mentioned this conversation, and it's funny because honestly, I don't even remember what I said.
It
But
had a
I'm
huge
really,
impact on me, though. I'll tell you that.
but I'm really glad it stuck. But it's like, so I think there's lines are always blurred because I feel like in America too, especially if you look at the East Coast and like New Jersey and New York,
Yep.
communities of color were like all mingling with each other. So that means the kids are all mingling with each other, whether it's like Latinx or, Arab or South Asian, Asian, Black, whatever. And so that becomes like a familiarity. and and I think that what people don't realize, I think honestly, I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. I think if you are not Black, you should just not say it because if Black people want to reclaim a word that's been used to oppress them, like that's our decision, that's our business. But if your history is not connected with it, if you're not a community, especially if you're from a community that runs rampant with anti-Blackness, especially with like South Asian communities or
Yeah.
like if you have no experience of what it means to a Black person, then you don't have any connection to that word and you don't have the authority to use it. It's just like full stop, period. And so I understand how that could be hard to understand because it's like, well, we're from the same neighborhood and
Right.
we grew up together. They use it. Why can't I use it?
Yep.
But when it comes down to it, their experience is going to be very different from yours. And you're aiding your use of the word when you're not a Black person is just like it's basically helping to align with white supremacy because you're like that's just what it comes down to. And I I just feel like with this conversation it can get so twisty and turny and there's so much nuance to it. So if you keep it on the level of if you're just not Black, don't
Yeah.
use it. I think that's the easiest thing. And also, why do you want to use it if you're
Right.
not?
And like those 2 points that you just mentioned, right, were critical for me. Like, number one, why there's so many other words out there that you could use, so why use this one particular word, right? And number two, you're aiding and abetting white supremacy
Mhm.
when you're using that word, whether knowingly or unknowingly, right? Like my socioeconomic status could be the same as any African American growing up, and we may have gone through similar experiences, and we may have been bothered by the cops on a similar level. But when you go out of your community and see the world beyond that, it's
Mhm.
a different experience, right? Like my skin color, colorism like sometimes colorism and racism get mixed together, but they're two
Yeah.
separate things, right? It's like when you step out of your own communities, it's a different experience, and people will view you. You might have been, you know, even raised in the same household, but if you have a lighter skin and a darker skin, you will be viewed
You
different.
will be viewed differently. Yeah.
And that's something that people may not realize.
Right. Exactly. Especially if they grew up in a community where they were one,
Right.
at one point. So it's just, I, yeah. And yeah, this, I just like, I could go into like a rant and I'm trying not to.
If you want to, this is the platform to do it, and I think people like me need to hear it. To be honest with you.
It's like, but you know what? I don't want to rant about it, but it's just
Sure.
like, I think you need to examine why you would fight so hard to use a word that has been, tied with so much violence and history and repression. Like, if Black people want to decide to use it for themselves, then let them do it. If you're from an Asian community and you want to use an Asian slur to define yourself, that's your business.
Yeah.
If you're from and so on and so forth. But when
Right.
you're outside of that, it just doesn't concern you.
The critical thing to focus on is that it's the reclaiming. Like Black people are reclaiming that word, and if you're
Exactly.
not Black, you can't you don't have claim to it. So
No, you don't.
that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Full
Uh,
stop. Period.
exactly. So moving on from that, Sean, we've been here before with this with the massive protests and the current environment. This has happened somewhat before, but after the killing of an innocent Black man in America, what is different with the George Floyd murder than it was ever before?
So I was thinking about this, and I honestly don't think anything is that different yet.
Got it.
I'm still waiting to see. But what I am noticing that is different is that the accountability is different,
Sure.
especially now with the use of social media and cell phone footage and all of these things where you just, especially white people, cannot deny it anymore. Like, you literally, especially with Amy Cooper, the one woman in Central Park with the dog,
Yep.
all these things used to be things that Black people were saying since the beginning of time, but they sounded so outrageous that
Right.
nobody believed it would happen, or they're just like, oh, you're just exaggerating it. But I think now that there's video proof and people, it's not blurry, it's like, no, it's right there, clear as day. I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh shit, well, now, I think we have to acknowledge this. And I think it's a matter of, I think what will actually happen, or what I hope will actually happen, is that the accountability doesn't, peter off, that people consistently keep doing the work, because we can protest and we can, riot and all that stuff. And Black people are very used to spending our time fighting for ourselves.
Right.
But for the white people and the non-Black people of color who aren't used to consistently fighting, it's up to them to actually just stay on people's necks. Right. And just be like, no, this fight isn't over. We have to keep doing it. So I don't know if things have changed yet, but I'm really hoping that people are just like, hey, I'm holding you accountable to this. And I'm noticing brands and corporations, I personally think that they're kind of just trying to save their ass a little bit.
Yeah.
But at least now they're saying, oh, well, we have to be on the right side of history because people are going to hold us to it.
I mean, even the NFL came out with a statement.
Which is like, I will believe some of these brands and corporations once they start putting Black people at the executive level, once they actually start doing the proper hiring, once they actually back up their claims, then maybe I'll believe them. Sure. But for now, I guess it's just a right start that they're publicly acknowledging that they have to do better. 100%. So that's what feels different to me.
Before moving along in our conversation, when you brought this up, a thought came to my mind. Earlier today, a very good friend of mine asked me a question. We were just on a Zoom call talking with each other, and he asked me a question which kind of struck me. And I'm going to ask the same question. How many white people do you think out there? Just I don't need you to give me a study. I don't need you to give me any factual data. This is not a fact. But in your opinion, how many, like, what percentage of the white population out there is racist at some level?
So I think in America, if you're white and you were raised here, I think you were raised with racist ideals that make you racist until you unlearn them.
Exactly. Yep.
So I think that's all white people until they acknowledge and try to um, get rid of all the systemic laws, all the institutionalized racism and all the things that give them that privilege to live the lives they do. Once that's accepted, once people are actively trying to change that, once you're unlearning the ways of how you actually oppress people, then you can say, I'm not racist.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of things that people need to face that make them, because what makes it confusing for a lot of people? They're like, well, I'm not lynching anyone. I'm not saying I don't want Black people in my house. And I'm like, that's not the only way you can be racist.
Or that I have an African American coworker
Yeah, I'm like, people have Black spouses and Black children, and they're still racist.
Right. Yeah. So I'll give you. So what I discussed with my friend was that, listen, and I put it a little bit more gently than
Yeah.
and you know why. So I said to him, listen, there's a lack of recognition of privilege that white people have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation, whenever that conversation is brought up I was like, listen, between you and me, you can have that conversation with me because, and we talked about this yesterday, Sean, I have this, South Asians in general have this sense of honorary whiteness attributed to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can quote you cases from 1909 to 1910 of immigrants from the Indian subcontinent coming to the U.S. and in the court of law, them being regarded as white, and then a few years down the road, it was argued that Indians are, there were some cases where Indians were regarded as people of color or Black,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of the cases were this attribute to whiteness, and also they had this honorary whiteness status attributed to them, and they also argued that because Indians from the subcontinent Indians had this Aryan blood in their bloodline from generations and generations and generations ago, they have a similar affinity or similar blood to white people. So again, putting all this in context, South Asians are given this honorary whiteness status, and I said to my white friend that, listen, you're able to have this conversation with me right now because you regard me differently than an African American person, right? Like for me, for you, I am it could be just because of our relationship, because he and I have a good relationship. It could also be because of my color. It could also be because of my status in society. But you and I are able to have this conversation. But if you sat down with another Black person, and if that person said to you that you are in a level of privilege that is not afforded to me, then that conversation is going to become a hot topic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because the person will get defensive, and it's like, well, that's that whole concept of white fragility, and that we all have to dance around. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
So I think unless and until that aspect is solved, right, like where white people in this country can recognize that, listen, just because I'm in a privileged state, or I am afforded privileges that other people, and especially Black people, are not afforded, it doesn't make me a racist to acknowledge the fact that I have these privileges. It just says that we live in a messed up society, right? And we need to fix it. The recognition of that is more important than, having the argument about it.
The recognition, and then the constant actions you take to try and dismantle that, and maybe even balance things out to your capacity, where you're like, well, actually, I know that I'm a white person in this room, but let me shoot the direction to this person, give them the platform that's next to me, like those type of things, because like you can recognize it and then you cannot do anything about it.
100%.
So it's like you have to actually consistently do the work.
That's the important part, right? Like once you recognize your privilege, being cognizant of it at all times, and working against it, right? Like working against your base instincts that you've grown up with. Um, it's a
which,
difficult.
yeah, which is why I think it's good that I'm hearing more, like when we talk about allyship, I think it's great that I'm seeing and hearing more non-Black people of color speaking out about it, because that's what's going to keep the conversation going instead of the complacency, well, like, yeah, but like I'm Asian, but so that has nothing to do with me, or yeah. And so, because people who aren't constantly oppressed aren't used to having to constantly fight.
Right. That's exactly
and,
right.
and so they're going to constantly need that push. And
Yeah,
so the more people pushing them, the better it'll be.
and that kind of moves us up to our the next question that I have for you is that the biggest issue, in my understanding at least, that we are trying to solve for, or society right now, especially Black people, are trying to solve for right now, is police brutality. That's
Mhm.
issue number one, in my understanding. um, which is more important, which is more often than not pointed at African Americans. Police brutality is. What are some other effects of systematic racism that Black people such as yourself go through on almost a daily basis?
So what's interesting is that like right now the limelight is on police brutality, but I think when the conversation comes to Black Lives Matter, what at least how I interpret it as a Black person is just that all facets. It's not just police brutality. It's, the healthcare system. There's racism in the corporate world. There's racism in the media. There's racism in the judicial system. Um, White supremacy is everywhere, and it affects us in every single corner, and not by accident. It's by design.
Yep.
And so what I like to tell people is just like, can you like look at the history of the world
Yeah.
and look at white supremacy around the world? We look at the lens of America, and I see this often too, because people are like, I'm so glad I'm not in America and that I'm in Europe. And I'm like, do you know what the UK has done? You know, like Europe has done. Do you know what all these like colonial empires have done around the world? It's not just America.
Yeah.
And like we're a lot more intertwined than we think. Especially because I'm talking to you as a South Asian person, Black person, like I tell my friend, like, we're cultural cousins, like
Yeah.
African, like down to our aunties, to the colorful weddings, to the food
Exactly.
that we eat. Like we're in each other's countries a lot too.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. And so we're constantly intertwined. So when we talk about the police brutality towards Black people, yes, that's a very important issue, but it's really all around. It's everything you can think of, down to getting loans, down to getting an apartment, down
Yeah.
to restaurant service. It's everywhere. And that's why Black people are fighting so hard to correct this, because it affects everything.
So for I think the restaurant service, the getting a cab anywhere in the city, right? Like
Yeah.
things like that are very visible, are people that are listening to us right now or watching us right now, can relate to that. But somebody might not be able to relate to,
Mhm.
how is there racism in the healthcare community? Can you give me a couple of, like an example or two of how that manifests itself?
Yeah. I can even speak on personal experience.
Sure, that'd be great.
But I'll start just like generally. I think, well, let's start with like childbirth. Black women are, I think it's 3 to 6 more times more likely to die in childbirth than white women,
Mhm.
and that is largely because if you want to go back to slavery, our bodies are often thought of to be stronger than they are, to hold more pain
Yep.
than it's supposed to be like this superhuman existence. So
Right.
a lot of the time when we're in the hospital, people ignore when we say something is wrong. People don't believe us when we say we're in pain. And you'll hear countless stories of women who are pregnant who have died because they complained to a nurse, they complained to a doctor that they didn't feel well, and then they had Serena Williams. She's one of them. She complained to her doctors when she was giving birth. Turns out she had blood clots in her lungs, but they all ignored her. And she had to demand, people to pay attention to her. Serena Williams.
Right.
So
Well,
if she,
yeah.
so if she can't get, attention paid to her, then what about, everyone else? And if you look at people with coronavirus right now, in certain communities, Black and Latino people are more likely to get infected and die of coronavirus. Why is that? I think it's because of a lot of factors. I think it's because we're so often essential workers, or there's often more of us in an apartment, living together. But also there's healthcare negligence.
Yeah.
When we go to doctors, when we go to nurses, we're turned away. We're told it's not that serious. We don't get proper treatment. So these are the things that lead to racism in healthcare. I remember telling a doctor that I was having neck pain, and he was like, "Oh, you're Nigerian, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Yeah, but you guys are like strong people."
Wow.
And I was like, what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah.
And people forget that doctors are humans. They have biases.
Yeah.
They have it's possible for doctors to be racist if they're human beings.
That's that's mind blowing. And because you said that, I forgot my next question, because that's horrific to just like, you're sitting there in pain and this doctor's like, "No, you'll be fine because
you have strong bones." It's like, okay.
Oh my God. And then corporate America, right? Like, you and I work together in a corporate America, so I know some of I've been a witness to some of this stuff. Can you give us like an insight into what experiences were?
I think so. It's interesting, not only so I work in television film, and I think it's very interesting not only being a woman, but being a Black woman in these spaces, because you're not only highly visible, because you're usually the only Black person or Black woman there, but at the same time, you're erased. Like, people don't acknowledge your existence. So, like, I'm trying to provide examples. So people will see you in the room and they'll see that a Black person is there, but they won't give that Black person in the room opportunities.
Yep.
And I've worked in countless spaces where, because I am maybe quiet and I just like do my job, I'm seen as angry or antisocial or not a team player.
Yeah.
Or I can't do. There's definitely times where in the places that we worked, people walked into the room and they're like, "You're the one doing the shoot? Where's Zoe?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "No, it's just me doing the shoot."
And I've been on the shoot with you, and I've been introduced to you as the producer for the video, and still I've been directed the questions. Right?
Yeah.
And the first time I just brushed it off, like, they know me, and that's why they're doing it. The second time I brushed it off, like, I have this relationship with this person, so obviously they're going to direct questions at me. And the third time I brush it off,
Yeah.
And then finally you're like, "No, there's something bigger here."
Yeah.
Like, they're ignoring shown, or like, you and I will be on an email chain together, and the questions, you're the person who's doing the project, but I'm just there for support, and the questions will be directed towards me.
Yeah, and I mean that happens all the time in workspaces. It happens all the time, and it's just like, it makes it hard for you to move up. It makes it hard for you to actually enjoy being at work because of all these microaggressions.
Yep.
There's, I mean, this is kind of funny, but I'm just even thinking of, saying hi.
Because you and I went through it together.
Yeah.
And now we can laugh about it because we're beyond it. But
Exactly, but it's like even in workspaces that I work in now, like I worked on a show, and I was the only Black person working as like on the team, and I was working as a producer, and I'm trying to find characters for the segments, right? Because it's a documentary, and I'm like, this is a bunch of white dudes. Can we get more women? Can we get more Black women?
yep,
And if you knew how hard I had to fight for even people to pay attention to like these Black people that I would like present as options. And they'd be like, oh, well, we don't want it to be about race. And I'm like, well, Blackness is more than race. I just think
right,
that this is actually relevant.
yep,
And it's nice to showcase a Black person in this role. And they're like, I think it's too tough,
yeah,
And I'm just like,
that's lazy.
no. So it's always a battle. It's always
Yeah.
a constant battle. And people don't realize from like content to even the person coming up to me being like, say something in Nigerian. And I'm like, why don't you say something in Irish?
Right.
Like, why
What
would you
is
just go?
that? What is that? What?
What is that? Like, it's just, and that's what I mean. It's just constantly everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
And the ignorance is always everywhere. And so that's why you see Black people like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I can't go to the hospital. I can't go to work. Can't go to this restaurant.
Yep.
Like, what am I supposed to do? And that's why people are fed up.
And just for our audience, like we're laughing through this because because there's nothing else to do about it, right? Like
You laugh, you cry.
yeah, there's nothing else to do about it. It's still a
Yeah.
very serious issue, but again, we're just lost for words. Last question I have for you, Shone, is it seems like in the zeitgeist, the narrative is changing right now. And I've tried to avoid this part of the conversation. I kind of saved it for last because I didn't want to steer away from this, right? From the
Yeah.
main points of our conversation. So again, the zeitgeist is the narrative is changing in the zeitgeist, and it's going from George Floyd's murder to and police brutality to violence during these protests. And what do you say to people who may be falling in this trap, which leads away from the main issue and focuses on something that's different?
Like in terms of like let's say the looting narrative or
Exactly.
just like things like that.
Exactly. There's, a couple of days ago when you were watching the news, it was all about George Floyd and all about what's going to happen with these four officers and four murderers. As soon as that third degree murder charge came down the pipe, the protests are still happening. The narrative changed, I feel like.
Yeah.
Even on news channels that are traditionally more liberal, like CNN, ABC, whatever have you, the narrative has changed from it being more about just the main issue of police brutality and what happened
Yeah.
to Floyd, and how there's a bigger problem to work towards here in America. And now it's about, they're destroying the city and they're
Right. Yeah.
the they now.
Yeah. I think whether people are looting or not, I think people need to ask themselves why you feel Black people don't have the right to be angry.
Right. Yep.
Because, Black people are arrested and murdered for selling water, for being at a traffic light, for
Yep.
barbecuing, for standing and breathing. And wouldn't that make you upset? So I don't understand why the emphasis is on tone policing and these respectability politics, where it's like, well, if you were acting like a stand-up citizen, maybe it's like people tried the calm way, but like people also have a right. Like if my husband, if my son or whoever was shot and killed for no reason, yeah, I'm going to bust some windows.
Right.
I'll probably bust more than windows. I don't care. I'm not going to be trying to be civil for you when these people are expressing grief. And also a lot of the protesting is peaceful.
That's exactly right. A lot of the protesting out there is peaceful, but the reporting is on, it's more sensationalism,
Mhm.
and it's more interesting to show rubber bullets being fired and tear gas being shot at people than it is for a bunch of people standing together, kneeling together, holding signs peacefully, joining hands and praying together.
Exactly. And also, if you look throughout history, change has come through riots.
Yeah.
Whether it be like queer history, Boston Tea Party, whatever it is, civil rights movements, they all were like people effing shit up.
Exactly.
And just like, yeah. So I just don't, I think people need to stop looking at the whole property destruction because I've heard it time and time again. You can replace a building. You cannot replace a life. That is what's important. These lives are important and this is what we're focusing on. Stop paying attention to the Starbucks being smashed because Starbucks has insurance and they will they will get through it. They will repaint. They will replace the window.
And some people are like, oh, this this man is already dead, and the burning buildings is not going to bring him back. Well, the thing is, we're not trying to bring him back. We know he's not going to come back. The point is that we don't want anybody to for that to happen to anybody else after him, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. And just to wrap it up, like I would say, looting sucks, right? We
Yeah.
all agree. Black people agree. White people agree. Brown people agree. Martians agree. Looting sucks, but people will, just like you said, Sean, like people will recover from it. We need to focus
Yeah.
on what's brought about the looting. The looting is a result of an entire race that has been subjugated for hundreds of years. I don't know what it's like to be black in America. I can't even, as I said at the top of this conversation, I can't even fathom the things that my African American friends have to deal with on a daily basis. It's horrifying. Listening to the stories that you've shared with me, it's horrifying listening to stories that other friends have shared with me, and I can't imagine going through that. And now in this day and age, I'm a witness to it on social media. George George Floyd for me is the perfect metaphor for the African American experience because he literally had the life squeezed out of him. And the systemic racism is squeezing in a similar way the African American community. So for me, looting is an afterthought. The bigger problem is that people you may well know don't have a similar experience as you in life, and
Mm-hmm.
yet you live on the same street with them, live on work the same jobs as them, and are citizens of the same country. So I agree. There are opportunities amongst protesters out there, and they're
For
looting and
sure.
burning things down. But if you look closely, the people that are looting are also white. They're also brown.
Yeah.
They're not all black. So, but when it comes time to actually put the blame for who's doing the looting, all of the blame is put afoot to black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this movement is about them. But let's look past the looting this time around. Let's look past the burning buildings this time around because there is a genuine problem out there that we need to solve. And this time around, if we look past it, we're closer than ever to actually finding a solution for it.
And there's just two last things I want to say.
Sure.
Also, that also ties back, the whole looting thing also ties back to if white people want to join in the protesting, take the lead of the black people that are at the head and on the front
Yep.
lines. Because you don't want to be performative. There are a lot of white people that are for it, but there are also a lot of white people joining in because it's fun to be chaotic.
Right.
And they're the ones smashing windows and they're the ones busting cars when black people are very specifically asking them not to. And
Yep.
I'm witnessing this a lot. There's videos of people just like causing chaos because they can, and then black people are taking the fall. And it's just not fair. So if there are non-black people of color and white people who want to join, just like be sure to not censor yourself and take the lead of the black people who are leading it. And the second point is people need to understand that while there's been horrible subjugation for black people all over the world, the reason why black people are still here is because it's pretty lit to be black. Like the culture the language, the style, the things, everything is just very beautiful, and
Yep.
it's vast and it's varied. And so we're not defined by the tragedies that happen to us. We're defined by like how we always persevere and come out of them. And so that's what people also need to notice. They need to notice the beauty in Blackness and not just feel bad because shit is like been thrown at us for, sorry, I'm keep cursing.
It's fine.
So it's been thrown at us for years and years and years. So yeah, those are just the points I want to make.
You brought up a good point, and I wanted this to be a part of a conversation, but I didn't have time. But I think we can maybe carve out maybe one or two questions about this, about cultural appropriation, right? Like that goes back a little bit to the N-word conversation that we had earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you feel about like a person with my skin color, or somebody who was brought up from a different minority but within like the same atmosphere as an African American, having that cultural appropriation, adopting, the
So the
Black culture traditionally?
so the problem with cultural appropriation isn't that, you know, people will rock the style or use the, the slang or whatever. It's when it's there's a lot of things wrong with it, but the problems come from when Black culture is cherry picked. So you want to take all the good things from it, but then um, you don't want to support us when we're marching, and you don't want to, speak out against injustice, and you just want to take, the good parts of Black culture and just use it for yourself. And also, if you want to talk about maybe the cultural and like capitalistic versions of it,
Yeah.
there are many people who will take Black culture for profit, and they will steal from Black people who are creating it. They will silence Black people, and the people who created the culture don't even get to benefit from the culture that they created. And it leads to a lot of erasure. There, you'll see people rocking. It's like when, who was it, Kim Kardashian or someone said they had boxer braids, and it's like those are cornrows. Like,
Yeah.
stop trying to change
Right.
history. Stop trying to erase Black people from from the things that they've created. I
Yeah.
think if more people just gave Black people the credit,
Right.
and Black people were given the agency to use the culture for whatever way they wanted to use it, I think the conversation of cultural appropriation would be very different. But throughout history, from rock and roll to fashion to like all these things, it's just been taken. And Black people have been removed from the equation.
And I was to say, like, there's copious amounts of history for when it comes to music. How
Mm-hmm.
the blues and jazz were stolen right from underneath the feet of Black people, and they
Yeah.
were remodeled as rock and roll.
Yeah.
And, you know, people need to read.
And if you look at the history, I mean, this is going off a tangent, but if you look at like Motown, like there would be artists who would record Motown hits, and then white artists would redo the songs
Yeah.
as a cover, and then those songs would be number one, and the original artist wouldn't get any of the recognition or the profit. So it's like
Yeah, I mean, look at Chuck Berry
Chuck Berry, or
yeah,
even like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who is like supposed to be like the mother of rock and roll.
yeah,
A heavy set, this large guitar wielding Black woman.
yep.
She's gonna who's really quoting Rosetta Tharpe?
I have never heard of that name until you just said it.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
know, but like she was like the beginning. Look it up. Look at some videos. She
Mhm.
was doing rock and roll in the beginning, but she's all but been erased from it.
Well, in just closing, this has been a great conversation, Shona, and thank you for kind of like showing us what how we can help and putting this into a sort of a context for us as well. Um, I really, really, our thoughts and prayers are with you, and hopefully a lot of our actions are going to be now with generally the Black and African American community at large as well. So, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much, and I'll speak with you soon.
All right, thank you for having me.